At 28,000 feet, there is a man in green boots. He has been lying in the same shallow cave for nearly 30 years. His knees are drawn up to his chest. His skin is the color of old leather, frozen hard. And every climber who has ever passed him on the way to the summit has used his body for the same thing. As a marker, a signpost, a way to know they are almost there. His name was Dorje Morup. He was a real man with a family who died on this mountain in a single terrible night. And he is not alone. More than 300 people have died trying to climb Mount Everest. Most of their bodies were never brought down. They are still up there, 200 of them, maybe more, frozen exactly where they fell. Some are hidden in the ice. Others lie in plain sight, beside the trail, so well preserved that the living step over them on their way to the top of the world. This is not a story about the highest mountain on earth. It is a story about the highest graveyard on earth. And to understand why the dead stay here forever, you first have to understand what this mountain does to the living. Mount Everest rises 8,849 meters into the sky, 29,000 feet, so high that its summit pushes into the jet stream, where winds can top 200 miles an hour. But the number that matters most isn't the height, it's a line. At 8,000 meters, there is an invisible boundary that mountaineers have given a simple, honest name. They call it the death zone. Above that line, there is not enough oxygen in the air to keep a human being alive. Each breath you take contains only about 1/3 of the oxygen you would get at sea level. Your body, no matter how fit, no matter how prepared, begins to shut down. It is, quite literally, starving to death for air. Think about what that means. Your cells cannot get the oxygen they need. Your judgment clouds. Simple decisions, which rope to clip, which way is down, become impossible. Climbers in the death zone have been known to sit down to rest and never stand up again. Some take off their clothes, their dying brains convinced they are burning hot. Others simply stop, a few hundred feet from the summit, and quietly slip away. The human body was never meant to be here. Doctors sometimes compare the death zone to standing on the surface of the moon. You are surviving, not living, and only for a matter of hours. This is why climbers carry bottled oxygen. This is why they move at the pace of a slow, shuffling walk, stopping to gasp after every single step. And this is why, when something goes wrong up here, a storm, a delay, an empty oxygen tank, there is almost nothing anyone can do to save you. Because in the death zone, there is no rescue helicopter. The air is too thin for the rotors to bite. There are no stretchers, no medics waiting. If you fall, the people around you, themselves barely alive, must make a brutal choice. Try to carry you down and likely die with you, or leave you and live. Almost always they leave. And that single, terrible fact is why the mountain became a graveyard. The man in the green boots died in a storm. It was the 10th of May, 1996, a day that would become one of the most infamous in the history of the mountain. A sudden blizzard trapped dozens of climbers high in the death zone as night fell. By morning, 8 of them were dead. Among them was Dorje Morup, part of the first Indian team attempting the summit from the north. Somewhere in that whiteout, exhausted and out of oxygen, he crawled into a small limestone alcove to shelter. He never came out. For years, no one even knew his real name. Climbers simply called him by the bright green boots on his feet, green boots. And because his cave sat directly on the main route to the summit, on the north side, nearly every climber who passed that way for the next 2 decades saw him, stepped around him, used him to measure their progress. If you reached green boots, you knew you were close. He is not the only one. Higher up, on a slope where the bodies of fallen climbers have collected over the years, their brightly colored down jackets, red, blue, green, stand out against the snow. Climbers gave that place a name too, one that hides its horror behind something beautiful. They call it Rainbow Valley. The colors are the coats of the dead. It sounds monstrous, doesn't it? To walk past a human body and feel nothing but the cold calculation of how much farther you have to go. But this is what the death zone does. Up there, the living have nothing to spare, no strength to grieve, no oxygen for horror. The dead become part of the landscape, as fixed and permanent as the rocks and the ice. In 2014, Green Boots disappeared from view. His body was moved or covered out of respect, so that climbers would no longer have to pass him on the trail. But he is still there, somewhere on that ridge. And every year the mountain claims a few more. In 2024 alone, as the ice melted, 5 more bodies emerged from the glacier, climbers who had been lost for years, given back by the thawing mountain. The dead do not leave Everest, they simply wait to be found. But here is the strangest part of all. Knowing all of this, knowing about Green Boots, about Rainbow Valley, about the 300 who never came home, more people want to climb this mountain than ever before. And that hunger has created a new kind of danger, one that has nothing to do with storms. On the 22nd of May, 2019, a mountaineer named Nirmal Purja took a photograph near the summit of Everest. It did not show snow or sky or a triumphant climber with a flag. It showed a line, a single, unbroken line of human beings, hundreds of them, stretching along the narrow summit ridge, packed shoulder to shoulder, inching upward, going nowhere. Purja counted around 320 people waiting in that queue. At 29,000 feet, in the death zone, the photograph went around the world in hours, because it revealed something almost no one had understood. Everest was no longer a wilderness conquered by a handful of elite mountaineers. It had become a traffic jam. That spring, Nepal had issued a record number of climbing permits, 381 of them, at $11,000 each. And when a narrow window of good weather opened, everyone rushed for the summit at once. The result was a bottleneck on the most dangerous stretch of the mountain. Climbers found themselves standing in line for 5, sometimes 6 hours, not moving, just waiting, in the one place on Earth where waiting kills you. Every minute in that queue burned through their limited oxygen. Every minute drained the last of their strength. And the reserves they needed to get back down, the most dangerous part of any climb, were being spent standing still. By the end of that season, 11 people were dead. Most of them did not die on the way up. They died on the way down after the summit when their bodies had nothing left. They ran out of oxygen in the traffic jam. They collapsed from exhaustion. They sat down in the snow to rest, just for a moment, in exactly the way the death zone tempts you to. And the debate exploded. Was Everest being sold to anyone who could pay? Were people with too little experience being guided up a mountain that did not forgive mistakes? The photograph forced a question the climbing world had avoided for years. If the mountain is this crowded, who is actually in control up here? To answer that, we have to go back. Back almost 100 years, to 2 men who vanished into the clouds near the summit, and a mystery that has never been solved. Long before the permits, before the traffic jams, before anyone had ever stood on the summit and lived to tell it, 2 Englishmen tried. Their names were George Mallory and Andrew Irvine. Everyone called Irvine Sandy. It was June of 1924, and they were part of a British expedition attempting something the world believed might be impossible, to become the first human beings to reach the top of the world. On the 8th of June, another member of the team looked up through a break in the clouds and saw them. 2 tiny figures, high on the ridge, moving strongly toward the summit. Then the clouds closed, and Mallory and Irvine were never seen alive again. For 75 years, the mountain kept their secret. Had they made it to the top before they died, 29 years before Edmund Hillary, and simply never come back down? Or had they fallen short? Then in 1999, a search expedition found George Mallory. His body lay at around 27,000 feet, face down, frozen into the slope, remarkably preserved after 3/4 of a century. He had fallen. His leg was broken. But the one thing they were looking for was not there. Mallory was known to have carried a small Kodak camera. If he had reached the summit, there might be a photograph inside it, proof. The searchers went through his pockets with trembling, freezing hands. The camera was gone. And Sandy Irvine had simply vanished. No body, no trace. For another 100 years, the mountain held on to him completely. Until 2024, when a National Geographic film team crossing a glacier far below the North Face found something in the melting ice. A single boot, a sock, and stitched into that sock, still legible after a century, a name: A.C. Irvine. The mountain, once again, was giving back its dead. Somewhere up there, the camera may still exist, its film frozen, perhaps still able to be developed. And if it is ever found, it could rewrite the history of exploration. It could prove that two men reached the roof of the world in 1924 in tweed jackets and hobnailed boots and paid for it with their lives. We may never know. And there is something fitting about that, a mystery the mountain refuses to release. If stories like this are why you're here, the kind of history that hides in the ice, take a second to subscribe. It genuinely helps this channel keep telling them. Because the next part of the story is one the mountain doesn't advertise. It's about the people who do the most dangerous work on Everest and almost never get the glory. Every photograph of a triumphant climber on the summit of Everest hides a truth. That climber did not get there alone. They were carried, not literally but close. The tents they slept in, the food they ate, the ropes they clipped into, the oxygen bottles that kept them alive in the death zone. Almost all of it was hauled up the mountain, again and again, on the backs of a single group of people: the Sherpas. The Sherpa are an ethnic group native to the high valleys of Nepal, people whose bodies, over countless generations, have adapted to breathe the thin air of the Himalayas. Without them, the modern Everest industry would simply not exist. And they pay for it with their lives more than anyone. Consider the Khumbu Icefall. It is the first great obstacle above base camp, a frozen river of ice, constantly shifting, riddled with deep crevasses and towering blocks of ice called seracs, some the size of buildings. They can collapse without warning. The icefall is widely considered the most dangerous part of the entire route. A paying client might cross the Khumbu Icefall 6 or 8 times during a climb. A working Sherpa, carrying loads up and down, ferrying supplies for the clients, can cross it 30 times or more in a single season. 30 passes through a death trap that can crush you in an instant. On the 18th of April 2014, at 6:45 in the morning, it did exactly that. A massive serac broke free above the icefall and swept down onto the climbers below. 16 Sherpas were killed. It was, at the time, the deadliest single day in the history of Mount Everest. 13 of the bodies were recovered. 3 were never found, swallowed by the ice they had crossed so many times before. In the aftermath, the Sherpas did something they had rarely done. They stopped. Grieving and angry at how little the families of the dead were offered in compensation, they refused to work for the rest of the season. For a moment, the multi-million-dollar Everest machine ground to a halt, and the world was forced to see who had been holding it up all along. The men who carry the mountain, and who too often are buried by it. It was not always like this. On the 29th of May, 1953, a New Zealand beekeeper named Edmund Hillary and a Sherpa named Tenzing Norgay stood together on the summit of Mount Everest. The first human beings ever to do it and return. They were part of a massive, disciplined British expedition, years in the planning. Reaching the top was treated as one of the great achievements of the century, on par with reaching the poles, or the moon still to come. For decades after, Everest remained the domain of elite mountaineers, people who had spent their lives learning the craft. The mountain was earned. And then slowly it was sold. Today, climbing Mount Everest is an industry. If you have the money and a reasonable level of fitness, a commercial expedition company will take you up. Just the permit from Nepal now costs $15,000. Before you have paid for a single guide, a single yak, a single meal, you are already more than $25,000 in. A full climb, with Sherpa support and oxygen, typically starts around $45,000. At the high end, with private guides and every luxury, it can run past $150,000. For that price, you can be guided, short-roped, and supplied to the top of the world. Sherpas will fix the ropes ahead of you. They will carry your oxygen. They will, if necessary, try to save your life. The summit that once took a nation's expedition to reach can now, in a sense, be purchased. But the mountain did not get the memo. It does not care how much you paid. The death zone treats a wealthy tourist and a seasoned mountaineer exactly the same. The thin air, the cold, the crowds, the sudden storms, they apply to everyone equally. And so we arrive at the strangest truth of all. We have made Everest more accessible than ever. And in doing so, we have made it in some ways more deadly than ever. Which leaves one final question, the one this whole story has been circling. Knowing everything you now know, why would anyone still climb it? Stand at the summit of Mount Everest, and for a few minutes, you are the highest human being on the planet. The curve of the earth stretches away beneath you. The sky above is nearly black. Everything, every other mountain, every person, every problem you have ever had is below you. People describe it as the closest thing on Earth to standing in space. But you cannot stay. You have minutes, not hours. Your body is dying. And the way down through the traffic past the bodies across the icefall is more dangerous than the way up. Most of the people who die on Everest die after they have already succeeded. So we are left with the question, why? Why spend a fortune, risk everything, and walk willingly into the highest graveyard on Earth, past the frozen dead who tried exactly the same thing? Perhaps because the mountain offers something the modern world almost never does, something real, a challenge that cannot be faked or bought out of or talked around. Up there in the death zone, all the noise falls away. There is only the next step and the thin air and the simple, ancient question of whether you will make it or not. Everest does not care about your job, your money, your story. It strips all of that away and asks one thing: can you survive here? For most of human history, we tested ourselves against the wild every single day. Now we have to travel to the top of the world and pay a fortune just to feel it again. The man in the green boots knew that pull. So did Mallory and Irvine, vanishing into the clouds in their tweed jackets. So did the Sherpas and the 300 others who never came home. They are all still up there, the permanent residents of the highest place on Earth, waiting in the cold and the silence, while far below, the next season's climbers pack their bags and pay their fee and begin the long walk up. The mountain is patient. It has all the time in the world. And it is always quietly waiting for more. If this is the kind of story you want to keep exploring, the places on Earth that still hold their secrets, subscribe, and come with us to the next one. Until then, keep looking up.